Friends in the Corner, a new podcast experience in the bluegrass state of Kentucky. Welcome back in, everybody, to Friends in the Corner podcast, here with episode 11. It's your host, Dan Pauly. And guys, I'm not going to take too much of your time up on the front end of the episode here with me talking, because we've got a long episode here for you guys today. But I just want to say, if you haven't been following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, you know where to find us. It's at FITC Podcast. That's FITC Podcast. And remember, you can email the show at friendsinthecorner@gmail.com as well. We are on all 5 of your favorite listening platforms. You can find us on iTunes. You can find us on Stitcher. You can find us on SoundCloud. You can find us on YouTube, and you can find us on Google Play. So whatever device you'd like to use, you can find us on all of your favorite devices these days. And guys, we hope you guys have been enjoying the month of October. You guys know Halloween is just around the corner here. Got your parties coming around. But also, October means October Originals. Yes. So this whole month, we've been doing some original content here for you guys, from bourbon reviews to So Here's the Story to coming up, we're going to be doing a UK basketball preview right before we go and take on Duke in the CBS Classic, I believe it is. We'll say that, the CBS Classic. And guys, this week we've even got a new special here for you guys, a Kentucky movie review. So we're going to start a series where we talk about some movies that take place here in Kentucky, talking with a group of people just to learn what they thought about the movies and what impact you think it has here in the Kentucky area. This month, the movie that we're going to be reviewing is called Neat, the Story of Bourbon. It was a documentary that came out in 2017, produced by a local man in the Lexington area named AJ Holzhalter. It had a large showing at the Kentucky Theater earlier this year. So guys, we're just going to take this moment to talk about what we thought of the documentary Neat, a bourbon story. So you don't want to miss that. And we're going to get ready to go into that right now. And that's how you open up a podcast. Welcome in, everybody. How are we doing today?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, guys. Well, this is going to be our very first Kentucky movie review. Or to say that 10 times fast. The story that we chose to do today was Neat, a story about bourbon. So, it was filmed here in town. A lot of different parts were taking place at a number of the different distilleries here in the state. Some of the bars that are here in the Lexington area also got a little bit of a shine and gleam as well in the presentation. And so I thought, hey, this would be something good to talk about with some of our friends. We did a bourbon review at the start of the month. Now we're finishing off the month with a bourbon movie review. So we're going to get started here. I'm going to let these guys introduce themselves. Some familiar voices you've heard before and some that you haven't heard before at all until now. So let's do this.
Hey, I'm Daniel. I drink bourbon and I know things.
Will Carpenter. I like to go to cool bars and drink alcohol.
My name's Isaac, and I just wanted to take this time to get Dan on the record for something. So, I love your podcast, love all the content that you've been creating.
Thank you.
But I really have a question for you.
Okay.
In your profile picture for this podcast, what are you looking at?
I am looking up pure space.
Just space.
Pure space.
There's no one there. There's nothing.
No one's there.
No cathedral, anything like that.
Photo credit to Shannon Bilby. She has told me to stare up into space, and then she took that picture.
Cheers, Shannon.
Cheers, Shannon.
Very professional.
Get well soon.
Get well soon, yeah.
Bev, and then?
And then I'm the last one, and I'm Zach, and I like to party.
Still partying since our last podcast. Well, this week, guys, we went and
cool t-shirts.
Yeah, and wear cool t-shirts. If you ever see Zach around town, you'll probably see him at Cup at some point here, CCI, or a number of different places. You'll always see a very fun, unique t-shirt that he'll be wearing out in the crowd.
I also know for a fact that he does not party.
Because you do all the partying.
Because I'm a party guy.
Well, this week we all watched the documentary Neat, either individually or collectively together. And so Neat, as I mentioned, is the story of bourbon. Neat is a documentary that drives into the rich story of the world of bourbon. The film is to celebrate the time, artistry, and relationships that make the American's only native spirit. And it's produced by the Orchard Group and a familiar name here in the Lexington area, AJ Holzhalter, directed by David Altrogi. And also stars Hollywood film actor Steve Zahn, who also lives in the Lexington area as well. So, cheers to Steve.
Cheers.
Cheers,
Cheers
Steve.
to
And
Steve.
Steve is
We love you.
Clink, clink.
But neat, as we've been talking about here, just tells the story of bourbon from the beginning, how it's made, all the way to the Prohibition, to it coming back into session, to it coming back into production, to kind of the fall of bourbon in the 1960s, all the way back to its resurgence now here in 2018. So we just kind of want to go through the story here and talk about what some of our favorite parts were. And so we're just going to kind of go around the table and talk about what we learned and what we thought were some interesting things we didn't know before about the bourbon industry here. So who wants to start us off?
You in a circle?
All right. So we are in a U shape here. So I guess we'll start with Daniel, who's to the right of me.
I thought it was a really good movie. Definitely really good for anybody who has never been on a bourbon tasting or a bourbon distillery tour. Kind of hits all the major points that those usually do. The production, distillation, where they get the grains from and all that. Simplifies everything down to where if you don't know anything about it, you'll catch up pretty quickly. But it had a few new and interesting facts in there that were pretty cool. Highlighted some special master distillers. I know Marion Eves from Castle and Key was on there. I recently went on that tour. It was super awesome. I think we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But overall, super awesome movie.
Okay. I think that's you hit on a good point there, though. It's like for anyone who has never been on a bourbon tour, or has maybe never even drank bourbon or even looked into learning about bourbon before, this is definitely a good gateway. A lot of stuff is similar stuff you would hear if you went to tour Woodford or Buffalo Trace or something like that, but this is just a really good entryway for people to just begin learning about bourbon.
Yeah, this is Will, and I agree with Dan. Like, I'm not a huge bourbon drinker, but knowing I always enjoy the history of the topic, and not knowing a lot about the subject area, it was very informative and it really taught you a lot. And it was cool because I grew up in Louisville, and they talked a lot about Butchertown Grocery and the cool spots in Louisville, so it was easy to relate, but it also had some good interesting topics, like the fall of bourbon, how they said it was an old man's drink, but certain aspects in the video, they had bartenders trying to make Jello shots with bourbon to try to make it more fun. So there was a lot of interesting talking points in the video.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those Pappy Jello shots were crazy, weren't they?
Yeah.
What was the bar? It was a bar in Louisville that was
Yeah.
doing the Pappy Jello shots.
Yeah. You
I've
said
been
you'd been there.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. It's close to downtown. I don't remember.
Begins
what
with
it's
an M. That's all I remember.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I had a Z in there.
Z.
called.
Anyway.
Oh, well. No, I thought it was great. The biggest thing that I really liked seeing was, and I think you probably get this a little bit whenever you do the actual tours, but I like seeing the care that went to choosing the grains and the corns and all of that, and just seeing that they really do care about the farms that they're going to. They care about the farmers that they're working with, and everything is actually Kentucky, because it'd be really easy for them to just ship in corn from Kansas or something, and then use all that stuff from this big producer. But it's kind of cool to see that, especially the Castle and Key girl. What was her name?
Marion Eves, is that
Marion,
right?
yeah. Especially seeing her just like at a farm choosing corn, talking to all those farmers and everything. I thought that was really cool, and I don't remember getting that information at a tour before, so that was really interesting.
I know Castle and Key tries to get everything possible from Kentucky, and even their barrels. Their barrels are from somewhere in Ohio, but they work really closely with them, and the place they get them from in Ohio just gets all the wood from like a 100-mile radius from their site. But yeah, I think most distillers try to get stuff from Kentucky. I know a lot of them do get some from outside the state, some corn, and probably rye more or less comes from out of the state.
Yeah. And I mean, when you're producing at scale the size of like Evan Williams, they have to get it. When you're getting bourbon at a bourbon shop in Beijing, like to have distribution that large, you have to just get the corn from wherever you can. Can't worry about it as much. But
supply and demand.
Knowing that there are true craft distillers that are taking the time needed and looking into all their ingredients and everything like that. That was really cool to know because you really don't hear about that very much.
No, I agree. It was interesting to see, like, because it really part of the story into this documentary, as we were kind of mentioning, was about the kind of the growth of a new distillery that's popping up, Castle and Key, as we've been name dropping here, and just kind of how they are going through the process of starting from this new master distiller, how she's picking all of her supplies and all of her grains and stuff like that to create her new bourbon that in the next couple of years hopefully we'll be able to get to enjoy. So it's very kind of interesting to go from the start to the finish on a new product that they have coming out.
Yeah. What I thought was really, well, first off, I think if you are not into bourbon at all, it's an excellent starting point because it gives you the history, and if you're coming to Lexington or whatever, it gave you like 3 or 4 like excellent bourbon bars to go to that you can try out new bourbons and stuff. Don't go to Enoteco.
Yeah.
R.I.P.
Enoteco's no longer
there. They mentioned it on the movie, but it's gone.
Yeah. It's not a thing anymore. It was really good, like introductory education on everything. They gave you interesting like little tricks. Like one guy told a story about how like if you like rub it in your hands initially, it smells like alcohol. You clap, whatever, it smells like corn, and you can kind of smell all the ingredients and everything in it. So it gave a lot of like just really things you would get from a tour. But if you can't go on a tour, you could just watch this movie and learn stuff about it and like have knowledge about the bourbon itself.
And that trick you just talked about is true. Will and I went on the James E. Pepper Distillery tour in Lexington a couple weeks ago, and they did that with us.
Really?
He poured pure grain alcohol or White Dog on our hands, and then we smelled it, rubbed our hands around, smelled it again, and you could definitely tell the difference between just alcohol and the corn and then all the grains inside. It was pretty cool.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
I just rewatched the documentary today, and I thought to myself, well, I was thinking about buying some White Dog just to try it, but then I realized I have a 2-year-old bourbon that I just bought that is definitely too early to have been bottled by this point. I won't say who the distiller was, but this has not really been the best bottled bourbon I had. So I thought to myself, this is the closest thing to White Dog I'm going to get because it still kind of tastes like White Dog for the most part.
Use it as your mixer. Put it.
So I did it, but I did it.
For huge.
So the idea is that what this trick is, you can try to find the profile of the bourbon that you've got in it from your main grain to what type of yeast you use and stuff like that. So you rub it together, and then you can smell it, and you can smell corn. Do it again, let it breathe, rub it again, and then you can smell like bread or yeast and stuff like that. So I had a wheated bourbon, so I smelled more wheat than I did anything else on it. But it was kind of interesting. And that trick was done by Mr. Freddie Johnson, who's a third-generation worker over at the Buffalo Trace Distillery. That area also, that part of the show also had a cameo from a friend of ours and a friend of the show, Mr. Sal Sanchez, and they were sure to get his laugh in part of that clip. Like,
what episode was Sal on?
Sal was my 4th episode.
Your 4th episode.
Yeah,
Man.
I believe so. May have to go back, but yeah, that was it's my 3rd most listened to episode since I started the podcast. So Sal did a really good job.
Sal, you're 3rd best.
I'll say some stuff that I thought was kind of interesting about it. I learned more about the history of bourbon than I was expecting to in this document because I've done almost every tour on the Bourbon Trail. And so I've kind of heard the same old song and dance a lot of times, like, oh, this is an old distillery. It was here during Prohibition and past Prohibition and so on and so forth. Everyone's got their Granddaddy's recipe that they put up there and stuff like that. But I thought there was some stuff that I found interesting. The Bottle and Bond Act, how E.H. Taylor was a big feature with the Bottle and Bond Act. Because
Can you tell us what bottled and bond is?
So Bottled and Bond.
We watched the movie, and then immediately after, Dan was like, "What's bottled and bond again?" And we had to explain it.
To be labeled as Bottled and Bond, the liquor must be produced. The liquor must be produced a product of one distillation season, January to June or July to December, by one distillery and one distiller and one distillery. It must have been aged in a federally bonded warehouse under U.S. government supervision for at least 4 years and bottled at 100 proof. The product must identify the distillery where it was distilled and if different, where it was bottled. Only spirits produced in the United States may be designated as bottled and bond, and it also says as one little addition that they need to be put in glass bottles. So no plastic bottles like our little bottle of Heaven Hell we have up on the refrigerator up there.
Which is a great mixing drink.
Well,
So to everyone who's listening there, bottled and bond, that's my go-to. I love it. If you see it on a bottle, it's probably going to be good.
Yeah. So what the reason why E.H. Taylor pursued this act with government was basically when bourbon was at a hot streak in the early 1800s or in the 1800s, people were trying to find ways to profit off of bourbon at the time without having to go through the aging process like other distillers had. So they would do stuff like they talked about to get the color right. They would take some alcohol and they would just spit tobacco in it and mix that around until you get that nice brown color. If it didn't taste exactly like bourbon, like didn't have that sting to it that a normal bourbon would, they would add acid to it. So people were actually like dying from drinking this fake bourbon. Fake bourbon that people were making. So to combat this, that's why E.H. Taylor pursued the Bottle and Bond Act, just to work to make sure that the bourbon that was being produced by real distillers was meeting the requirements and I'm trying to find the right words here, but
standards.
The standards, that are needed for bourbon to be made appropriately.
Now, they talked about how the bourbon industry is the most regulated industry in the United States. And I thought that was an interesting point, because do you think that goes back to people manipulating the substance? And maybe the Congress was getting tired of that. So was it the FDA that regulated it, the bourbon, or?
Yeah, well, bourbon existed before the FDA did, and I think one of the very first laws or bills passed by the FDA was the Bottle and Bond Act. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it was something to do with bourbon. Was the FDA's first act.
So at least we know the FDA did one good thing.
One good thing.
They're making sure the alcohol is
Right. Priorities.
Another thing that I just kind of found interesting is they continue on, so they went through Prohibition, then after Prohibition, and they talked about the 1960s and how that was kind of the decline of bourbon in the country, because a lot of people had this view of it as the old man's drink. Or
they were drinking clear spirits.
They were drinking clear spirits, vodka,
gin.
whiskey. And they were talking about how bourbon was trying to compete against these other alcohols by trying to make clear bourbon, by basically like funneling it down and keep distilling it until it becomes clear.
They took good product that had aged and then just diluted the heck out of it.
So they literally like turned it right back into White Dog.
To try to keep up, but it didn't work.
No.
But now we're booming.
Yeah, now.
And now you can't find the bourbon you want on the shelf.
No, there's more demand for it now.
Do you think the younger generation views it as an old man's drink, or do you think they view it as more of a new blooming industry?
I think it's just a change in the generation, because I think of it this way. So I'm a bourbon drinker, but my parents are not. But my grandparents are, and my grandparents were 20-year-olds in the 1950s and all that stuff. So they had bourbon and whiskey around that time. Then my parents, when they were in college in the 70s and 80s and stuff like that, they were kind of that generation where that wasn't that cool. So then I think it kind of came back around to us where we're not really interested in. Well, I shouldn't say we're not interested in vodkas and whiskeys. Those are still being consumed, but
I think all alcohol.
All alcohol, yeah, it's like-
right now.
Yeah.
Less
Yeah.
discrimination.
yes, there's. We'll drink anything.
But I think bourbon has. I think a lot of people don't really drink bourbon, but they like or they respect it and kind of want to understand it. Because like going to distilleries, I know people that hate bourbon, but they love going to distilleries. Like they won't ever drink it, but you know, going on a tour is cool. And I think bourbon is kind of behind a lot of the boom in the bar industry as far as like speakeasy type bars and that kind of thing. Because those are really popular now. And that kind of goes back to the Prohibition type days when people were making whiskey out of their bathtubs or whatever.
And like Daniel's saying, the distillers, it's almost like an art form. And like they said, for someone to be so passionate about bourbon, they almost have to be, because whenever they start in their 20s, the first product comes out when they're much older. So they're taking a risk by they don't even know if the substance is going to be good. So they have to be so passionate about it to succeed in the industry.
You better have a damn good marketing firm.
Bleep.
I found out damn is fine.
Okay.
But Travis dropping F-bombs every other word. That's not fine.
Bleeps were hilarious,
Oh.
though. I loved it.
Which, by the way, he's not with us because he's in Virginia now. But cheers to Travis. It is his
Cheers,
26th
Travis.
birthday.
Travis.
So happy birthday,
Happy
Travis.
birthday,
Travis.
Clink, clink, clink.
Any other thoughts?
For me, even we were talking about like the culture behind bourbon. I mean, I drink it sometimes, but I still think of like an old man with a big old mustache and like an old suit, which smoking a cigar and like a speakeasy. So it's still like an old man's drink in my mind, but I think like our culture just doesn't care. So it's just because it tastes good and stuff like that. So I mean, I don't know.
Well, I think we were kind of hitting on it. I think like learning how to be creative with cocktails and stuff like that has helped like kind of reintroduce it back to people in a way too. You go in a bar and they can make 100 different things for you out of bourbon or whiskey.
It also has the fun backstory. Like, I mean, I know that's what I love is the backstory of stuff.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, you know, I'm at. Are we allowed to name drop bars?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm at Jack Rose, which is a bourbon bar in Washington D.C. There's a whiskey advisor there, and he just comes up and he's like telling us about this Bird Dog. Like apparently it used to be a great bourbon. I had some of it from the 60s, 70s, and it was really good. And he could just tell us the whole story. And he's like, oh yeah, by the way, this distiller, and he could go through and tell us all that. I was like, oh wow, like there's some guys tears are in this probably, you know, because it's like they worked so hard to perfect their craft. And then they mentioned this in the neat movie, and he's like, if you are a master distiller, you really only get to perfect your bourbon 3 times in your life because it takes so long. Because like for the Pappy, so you know, 23-year Pappy, he could only do 3 because by the time it gets done, he can't change his recipe until he's tasted what he's done distilled for 23 years. So he has to distill another one for 23 years, and just knowing all of that is going into what you're consuming. I mean, it interests me. I don't drink bourbon as much as I used to, but I still, when I have a bourbon with a good story, that's what I'm looking for. It kind of helps you appreciate what's gone into it.
Right. And there's nothing else really in America that has the history that bourbon does as far as spirits go.
Or really celebrates it. Like, I mean, you got like breweries that do that. Like, we were just not too long ago, Daniel and I went out to Budweiser and stuff like that, but it's still even not the same like cherished history like you would get like when you go to a distillery.
One of the coolest things in the movie Neat was how they featured an archaeologist, and he was like, his literal job was to go and discover remains of old distilleries and in Kentucky, and that's what he did for a living. And he they showed some stuff that he found, and they're currently digging underneath Buffalo Trace. Apparently there was an older distillery like right underneath the spot where Buffalo Trace is today. So that stuff's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And people today care about, you know, local and you know, stuff that has history to it. So I think that's why
They care about
bourbon is a little bigger right now.
interesting stuff in their areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is why this documentary was just such a hit in this market, was just because everyone, and not most people in town here, they do care about bourbon because it's a part of the Kentucky culture.
Yeah.
It's part of our story as Kentuckians and a part of our state. So this thing was definitely played all over the place as soon as it came out. And yeah.
And I've never seen a part in the country where you've seen old warehouses that used to be distilleries and people just buying them up to just start them over again just because they're so passionate about bourbon. I've never seen anything like that before.
Yeah. It's definitely a fun time to be in Kentucky right now, guys. That's all we're saying. But,
That's right.
Yeah.
And all the bourbon money's bringing us nice parks
Yeah.
and restaurants and bars, and you just fly into the Louisville airport, and it's just like, this wing brought to you by Woodford Reserve or Brown Foreman or so. There's this big plaque, and yeah, it's a fascinating time for sure.
I just looked up some facts about this documentary. I think it came out back in February. It topped the list of documentaries on iTunes for at least a week. I think it was a couple weeks, and it was 4th overall, even behind stuff like Thor, Ragnarok, Murder on the Orient Express, and The Disaster Artist. So it was right behind those 3 back when it first came out. So that's pretty cool as far as like a documentary goes.
Good job, AJ. Getting the name out there of bourbon.
Cheers to that.
Cheers to Kentucky.
I'm running out of
Kentucky
drink.
and AJ.
We need a refill break.
Refill break.
But yeah, man. So it was just a very amazing documentary. I thought it was one of the better ones I've seen. Just to inform people about the bourbon industry, maybe think it in a way that you haven't. If anything, I hope it gets people who have never gone and toured a distillery just to go tour one, regardless of which one you went to. Some are better than others. I think we've definitely been to some good ones and some bad ones. But can't go wrong with Buffalo Trace. Can't go wrong with Woodford. Makers. I love Makers. Is probably one of my favorites.
Makers is a great tour.
Yeah. So if you are just even in driving distance, I encourage you guys just to go tour a distillery because it will open your eyes up to even stuff that wasn't even highlighted on the documentary as well.
And when you're looking for things to do, typically it's a very economical option that you can do. So I mean, most of the tours that I've seen are only like $10. You're gonna get tastings. You're looking at probably an hour of information, walking around looking at stuff, and then a lot of times you can just kind of go explore on your own and kind of look around.
And then sometimes you'll even get to meet the master distillers too. Like Catherine and I, earlier this year, we went and toured Wild Turkey. And Jimmy Russell, who's in the film, he's the master distiller there. He was just out there hanging out, slamming bottles, and we talked to him for about an hour. He was a really nice dude. So you never know, just go have some fun with it. Yeah. And I think that's going to lead me into this next part here, guys. What I want to do is I'm just going to gauge the room here. We're going to ask you guys what your favorite bourbon is to drink, what your favorite bourbon tour has been, and we're going to, since one part of the video was about showing different bartenders around Lexington what our favorite cocktail bar is that we've ever been to. So let's start with favorite bourbons first. Daniel?
Favorite bourbons. I'm between 2 right now. My go-to favorite bourbon has been E.H. Taylor for about a year. Either the single barrel or the small batch. They both taste pretty similar. But I recently got Old Forester 1920, which is just it's awesome. It's high proof, but it's so smooth. Tastes like, it's basically like cherry cobbler in whiskey form. Honestly.
Cherry cobbler.
Yeah.
Old Forester.
Well, I don't drink bourbon a lot, but the first time I had Pappy was probably my favorite.
And you were spoiled ever since.
It was incredibly smooth.
You peaked.
And I don't think I ever tried a bourbon better than that after that. So
I'm pretty torn. I have bottles of Rock Hill and Elmer. I think Rock Hill Farms is probably my favorite bourbon right now, for sure. Yeah. Final answer.
I don't remember what it's called. We had it in the bourbon tasting whenever I was there for that.
The E.H. Taylor. That was the E.H. Taylor single barrel.
That was just incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredibly complex. It's got spice. It's got It's got that caramel in it.
Got that alcohol.
Got that
plus
alcohol. You know, it's good. It's a good old. It's a good drink.
Well, Zach, I want to say that I'm actually very proud and impressed of you from where we were in college to where you are now. Because when Zach, Isaac, and I used to live together in a house in college known as the Shire with Travis and Evan, all the guys have been on the show before. And when we were in college, Zach exclusively drank Fireball.
Oh yeah.
Zach had a bottle of Fireball.
Nectar of the gods.
Yeah.
He also loved his Kraken.
Yeah, Kraken
Oh,
too.
Lord.
For my favorite bourbons, I've kind of got a split list too. So I've had Pappy before, and Pappy's probably the nicest thing I've ever drank. But I think it was Pappy 10.
Pappy.
Will's
10.
brother gave it to me.
Pappy 10. Yeah.
Pappy 10.
Well, didn't you have some Pappy at Arcadium?
That was Pappy 10 too.
That was Pappy 10
yeah,
too.
so that was the same thing. For my go-to buy bourbon, if I just want to splurge and spend some money, I love Woodford Double Oak. But probably one of the best things I could buy, I can just conveniently buy off the shelf now that if I could, I probably would be Wild Turkey Kentucky Spirit. That stuff is so good.
Wild Turkey's also a good tour.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly beautiful. The tour is less informative, but
it's beautiful
down
buildings.
there, yeah.
And you'll meet Jimmy, possibly. Well, guys, all right. So those are our favorite bourbons. How about favorite tour that you've done? It doesn't even have to be in Kentucky. I know some of you guys have toured some stuff in other states as well. But yeah.
I just recently went on Castle and Key, and I thought it was awesome. It was an hour and a half tour. Lots of history there because it was the old Taylor Distillery back in the day. So they had lots of history. Just very beautiful area. And right now they're just doing a cocktail tasting. But their cocktails are really good because the bourbon's not out yet. But really excited to taste their bourbon when it comes out.
It's been a while, but I would say Buffalo Trace. Just where the bourbon distillery is located is just beautiful, and just the how massive the facility is. It's just incredible, and just hearing the backstory and how many barrels they actually have. That was and the tasting was obviously the best part, especially the root beer and the liqueur mixed together.
Bourbon cream.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely recommend going to that one.
And you might even get Freddie Johnson to come do a tour for you, man.
I think I'm gonna go a different route because I was gonna say Buffalo Trace too, but since Will said that, I had a great experience at a distillery in Milwaukee. It's called Great Lakes Distilling Company. They do a bourbon. The bourbon was decent, but their vodkas, brandies, and gins were just out of this world. They had barrel-aged gin that tastes like caramel water, one ice cube and a shot of this gin, and it's easy to drink. And also the people that are there super kind. I mean, it wasn't very busy. I think we were there on like a Monday or Tuesday night or something, and they just like walked us through every single little bit. They let us try like random things they had in the back, and they were just like, "Oh yeah, this is a brandy. We're probably not going to release it, but you know, you can try this and see what you think of it." And it was like a strawberry brandy that was really good, and yeah, that was a really good experience for everyone that went on that trip.
So I've only been on one distillery tour. So
that's your favorite.
So my favorite is Buffalo Trace. Honestly though, like it was a great time. Like even outside of the buildings, they have incredibly beautiful like trees and landscaping there. It's like beautiful area. All the buildings are like really old and rustic and stuff. The barns, they kind of have like a musky feel to them, which doesn't sound the best, like just saying that, but it was kind of like an interesting, like it kind of like gave you more of an understanding of like the character of where it's coming from and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. You kind of get in the feel of the bourbon and all that stuff. So it was a really cool tour to go on, I think. It was a lot of fun.
And our very own Evan got married there. Probably my favorite wedding.
Best wedding I've been to.
Best wedding I've been to.
Yeah. Cheers to that.
Yeah,
cheers to Evan. Clink.
After this episode came on, Evan was just on the last previous podcast where he told us about the swamps of Dagobah. So this is kind of for those of you who are deep in the Reddit universe, you'll know all about that. But this is a much more appealing story to tell about Evan. And then my favorite tour, as I kind of mentioned, is Makers. Makers was a really cool tour we did. Me and Daniel and my brother and a couple people did about 2 years ago.
Yeah, it was a couple
summers ago. But we did a bit of a full bourbon tour where we went to all the places. And Makers was probably one of my favorites. They have all this like glass blown art around. You can go see the vats, and they actually let you like take a little taste of the malt from the vats as well. They got a cocktail bar in there and a restaurant and stuff like that. It's super awesome. You have to take like these windy backwoods roads in order to get there. Like we almost hit a dog.
It's a BFE.
Yeah, there is nothing in Loretto, Kentucky except Maker's Mark.
Yeah,
but that and Woodford. Woodford's also a beautiful tour as well. So.
Woodford. I mean, I haven't been on a bad tour, honestly.
Yeah. Oh, I've been on a bad tour.
I've been on a bad tour.
All right, we'll throw shade. Town Branch is not that good.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Well, the tour is not great. They have a good tasting. You get to try beer and
that Kentucky Sunrise
bourbon.
is great.
The Kentucky Sunrise is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's for everyone out there. It's coffee and then their bourbon cream, and they mix it. I think 50-50, and it is just it's delicious.
Yeah, it's really good. But yeah, I've been on lots of tours and they're all good in some form. Angel's Envy I went on recently. That was a really good tour. What else? The Pepper Distillery in town. Me and Will, like I said earlier, went on that. It was actually probably one of the better tours. They had lots of different tastings. They gave you some straight from the barrel. They gave you some rye straight from the barrel, which was really cool.
Engaging.
Yeah, very engaging.
And so this is the James Pepper Distillery that just reopened back up in the Lexington area. For those of you who might not be listening from our territory here, but really cool tour. And that whole area's got some really cool history to it.
Goodfellas.
Yeah, despite the bad publicity, they're still a good place to go.
We love Goodfellas.
We love Goodfellas. The Crank and Boom.
Yeah.
But yeah, so all this whole area around the distillery has even become a real hot spot for people to go to.
Yeah.
Great concert venue.
Yeah. All right, and then the last question here, guys. Your favorite cocktail bar you've ever been to?
Or bourbon bar.
Or bourbon bar. Bourbon bar, cocktail bar, plain bar, whichever you want to go to.
I've been to a few really good ones. Westlight in New York City is probably definitely the best I've been to. It's a rooftop bar in Brooklyn. Great view of the city. That's probably the main reason. The cocktails are really good. They have a good food menu, good vibe to it. So if you're ever in New York City, definitely check out Westlight. You won't be disappointed.
I'm stuck between two, but since I grew up in Louisville, I'm going to put my support with the one in Louisville, and that's Butchertown Grocery.
Which was highlighted in the show, too.
Yeah,
it's delicious.
Butchertown's awesome.
Great
Great
restaurant.
food, great bar.
And the first time I went there, we didn't know actually where the bar was. So we went into the main entrance asking where the bar was, and it's very cool because it's in the back, up the stairs, and it definitely feels like a speakeasy. And you walk in, and it's very dark, and you have to go behind curtains, and they have some of the best cocktails I ever had, and they have great hors d'oeuvres, and just the passion they have for the drinks. You definitely will have a fun time if you're ever in Louisville.
Man, this one's really hard. So when you're looking at bourbon bars, Jack Rose for sure is my favorite that I've been to so far. It's a bourbon bar in DC. Their collection is extensive. I think they said they had 1,700 bottles on the walls at the place, and then they had like another 2,000 bottles of bourbon at their off-site like warehouse or whatever. That was the one that had the advisor. But when it comes to like personal favorites, I'm a sucker for a speakeasy.
Yeah.
So I mean, Marvel Bar in Minneapolis, Black Sheep in Des Moines. That's Black Sheep's my favorite.
Black
That's
Sheep.
a vampire-themed speakeasy in Des Moines. Yeah, it is awesome. I went there twice while I was there. They had the second night. They had a guy who was an actual disc jockey showed up with a basket full of records and 2 record players. He was mixing music back and forth. It was awesome. It was such a good experience, and it's all red. There's no sunlight ever in that place because it's like in a basement, and all the lights are red like vampires. And there's just and the best tequila I've ever had.
I usually trust Isaac when it comes to food or alcohol recommendations. Anytime I travel, I usually text Isaac, "Hey man, where should we go?"
For me, so I got kind of 2. I'm split between right now. One is actually back up in my hometown in Dayton, Ohio. One that Zach and Isaac are
The one
familiar
hundo.
with. Century Bar is a cocktail bourbon bar that's in Dayton, Ohio, downtown there. And it kind of went through a revitalization not too long ago because my dad, whenever I told my dad I went to Century Bar, he thought he went to the original Century Bar when it was just a rundown bar and stuff like that. But now they got some new owners that have really revamped into something really cool. So if you're in the Dayton area, Century Bar in downtown, worth going to. But then my personal favorite has been a place in Nashville called the Patterson House, and it's kind of that speakeasy.
I've been there. That
Super
place is
cool.
awesome.
Yeah.
Did you say Asheville or Nashville?
Nashville
in Tennessee. Yep.
It's like it was like an old library or something, and it basically still is an old
You go
library.
behind the bookshelf and get into the speakeasy
Mm-hmm.
bar. When we were down there, Catherine's sister and brother-in-law took us there, and it was really, really awesome. And the drinks, every drink you got was amazing, and they were like $11 each, so it was like really affordable too. So
Yeah.
I was like, yes.
I will say I did wait about 2 hours to go to that place when I was in Nashville though, so you got to catch it on like a good night.
Yeah, but it's worth it. It's pretty awesome. So, and then of course we can't get off this show without giving a shout out to some of our favorite local bars here in Lexington, right? So I mean,
I think we all know
Bourbon
which
on
one I'm talking
Bourbon on Rye.
Bourbon on Rye.
Bourbon on Rye has been one of our go-to cocktail bars here in the Sound. Chris and James are the owners up there, and they've just done a really good job there. Some of our balling on a budget bars that we've gone to as well. CCI, Chevy Chase Inn, owned by the same guys that own Bourbon and Toulouse. It's just a fun time to go there. You don't expect anything too crazy with their drinks, but just a fun time just to go there and drink.
Good people, good pours.
Yeah.
You see a
Oldest bar in Lexington.
Very
too.
liberal.
Yeah.
Very liberal.
You might see a
course
wild
there.
Chris Wilson out there.
Yeah, you might see a
wild
wild
Chris
Chris Wilson.
We can't forget Goodfellas Cocktail Bar. That was
Yeah.
up there.
Good tell.
Yeah.
They've
Bar.
done
That
a
was
really
a
good
good
one.
time there, honestly.
Charlie Brown's.
Charlie Brown's.
Yeah, good.
OBC.
OBC is
OBC's
really
always
good.
got some good drinks.
I gotta say it. This one's a little bit of an argument, but I love Ona.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Barona?
Yeah,
Barona
I
is
love Barona.
incredible.
I
Great
used to
vibe.
love Barona.
I used to love
But
Barona.
honestly, when it comes to cocktails, you get that whole block. You got Barona makes great cocktails. Minglewood makes good cocktails. Coeur d'Alene makes great cocktails.
North Lime is just a hot street in Lexington.
Yeah.
Okay.
So go on there and check them out. And actually, one to check out too.
West Main Crafting Company.
Yeah, West Main Crafting Company. If you go check out West Main Crafting Company, Chris Wilson was the architect who helped design that bar. So you can go check that out as well. Well, guys, for that is the end of our podcast episode here. So if you want to follow my show, you can follow me personally on my Twitter at DanPolly14. You can also follow the show at FITC Podcast. And remember, you can always email the show at friendsinthecorner@gmail.com. That's friendsinthecorner, all together lowercase, at gmail.com. Thank you guys again for a wonderful time.
Make sure you like, subscribe.
Click the bell.
Yeah, click the
Click the
bell,
bell.
notifications.
Leave us a review on iTunes and Stitcher. We need that crap. Let's
All
go.
the Twitters.
All
We
the
need
Twitters.
reviews. If you
If
write
this
comments,
gets-
we're listening.
If this gets 5,000 likes, well, I'll do something.
You heard it.
promising.
That's promising. All right.
Peace.
All right. Well, that was our movie review for Neat, the Story of Bourbon. I want to thank Isaac, Zach, Daniel, and Will for being on this episode with me and giving me their viewpoints on the film. Guys, if you haven't yet, go check it out. You can find it on iTunes and Amazon now, or find it at your local library. And guys, you can follow neat on Twitter at The Bourbon Film as well. Remember, you can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram at FITC Podcast. That's FITC Podcast. Remember, you can also email the show at friendsinthecorner@gmail.com as well. And remember, if you're listening on Stitcher and iTunes, please leave us a review. That will help us get some better content out here. But guys, thank you again for turning into another episode of Friends in the Corner Podcast. Next week, we're going to be doing a UK men's basketball preview for the 2018-2019 season, and I'm excited to announce that we're going to be having our friend of the show, Adam Banks, back on to our podcast as well. So you don't want to miss that. That's a wrap.